Marcus Ellington had everything a man could ever want. He was a billionaire by 30, a household name in the corporate world, and the owner of one of the most prestigious law firms in the country. His days were filled with high-stakes negotiations, luxurious parties, and the cold satisfaction of winning at all costs. Yet, behind the designer suits and the glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, there was an emptiness he refused to acknowledge. He wasn't just rich, he was powerful, and power meant never needing anyone. It was another ordinary evening at his office when his assistant knocked hesitantly. "Sir, your dinner has arrived." Marcus didn't look up from his laptop. "Just leave it on the table." The assistant cleared her throat. "The delivery person insists on handing it over to you directly." Marcus finally lifted his gaze. Annoyed. "What?" Before his assistant could respond, a voice interrupted. "Because you need to sign for it." A young woman stood at the door, her uniform slightly crumpled from the rain outside. She was holding a takeout bag, unimpressed by the man staring at her as if she were an alien. Marcus sighed. "I don't have time for this. Just give it to her." He gestured toward his assistant. The woman didn't budge. "You ordered it. You signed for it." Marcus raised an eyebrow. No one ever spoke to him like that. "Are you serious?" She held out a pen. "Very." For a moment, he considered kicking her out, but something about her unwavering stance made him pause. With an exaggerated sigh, he took the pen and scribbled his name. "Happy now?" She smirked, ecstatic. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. His assistant looked horrified. "Should I report her?" Marcus let out a short chuckle, shaking his head. "No. She's got guts. That's rare." He didn't know it then, but that delivery girl was about to turn his world upside down. The next morning, Marcus had nearly forgotten about the delivery girl until she walked into his office. This time, she wasn't wearing a delivery uniform. Instead, she had on a simple yet professional black blazer, her hair neatly tied back. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her sharp eyes scanning the room as if she belonged there. Marcus glanced up from his desk, surprised. "You again?" She smirked. "Didn't expect to see me so soon, did you?" He leaned back in his chair, amused. "Not unless I ordered breakfast and didn't know it." She walked forward and placed a file on his desk. "I'm not here for deliveries. I'm here for work." Marcus narrowed his eyes, flipping open the file. It was an internship application. His firm's logo was stamped at the top, along with a recommendation letter from one of the country's top law professors. His amusement faded. "You're applying for an internship at my firm?" She crossed her arms. "Correction, I already got it. Today's my first day." Marcus studied her, trying to reconcile the delivery girl from last night with the confident young woman standing before him. "You're a law student?" "Top of my class." She didn't sound boastful, just factual. He scoffed. "And you do deliveries for fun?" "For survival." She held his gaze. "Not all of us are born billionaires." Something in her tone made him pause. There was no bitterness, just a quiet strength that intrigued him. Marcus leaned forward, lacing his fingers together. "What's your name?" She tilted her head. "Now you ask." He smirked. "Consider me curious." "Lena Carter." Marcus repeated it under his breath, as if testing how it sounded. Then he nodded. "Fine. Let's see if you're as smart as you think you are." Lena smiled, a knowing gleam in her eyes. "I was hoping you'd say that." She turned and walked out, leaving Marcus with an unfamiliar sensation. Intrigue. He had underestimated her once. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Marcus had seen his fair share of interns, eager, nervous, and desperate to impress. But Lena Carter was different. She didn't try to flatter him. She didn't stumble over her words. And she definitely didn't fear him like the others. Instead, she challenged him. On her first day, she sat in on a high-profile case discussion. Most interns would have listened quietly, afraid to speak out of turn. "Not Lena. That argument won't hold up in court," she said, flipping through the documents. The room went silent. The senior associates exchanged glances, and Marcus raised a brow. "Excuse me?" Lena didn't flinch. "The clause you're relying on contradicts a precedent set by the Supreme Court 2 years ago." She tapped the document with her pen. "If the opposing counsel brings it up, we'll lose." A junior lawyer scoffed. "And you know better than us?" Lena slid a case reference across the table. "Page 32. See for yourself." Marcus watched as the room fell into hushed murmurs. The lawyer who had dismissed her went pale as he flipped through the pages. She was right. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Lena with newfound interest. Well, looks like we've got a legal prodigy in our midst." Lena simply shrugged. "Idome homework." For the first time in years, Marcus felt something rare. Admiration. Not because she was a genius, but because she wasn't afraid to prove it. But admiration wasn't enough to win him over. He thrived on competition. And if Lena wanted to survive in his world, she'd have to prove she could keep up. So he decided to test her. That evening, he called her into his office. "I have a case for you," he said, sliding a thick file across his desk. Lena picked it up, flipping through the pages. "This is a merger contract. Find the loopholes," Marcus said, watching her closely. "By tomorrow morning." Lena met his gaze, unfazed. "That's it." Marcus smirked. "Let's see if you're as brilliant as you think you are." She smiled. "See you in the morning, Mr. Whitmore." Marcus had given her an impossible task, something no intern had ever accomplished. But deep down, he already knew. Lena Carter wasn't like anyone he had met before. And something told him this was only the beginning. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office fully expecting Lena to have failed. The task he had given her was beyond the capacity of even some of his junior lawyers. He had designed it to break her, to remind her that, despite her confidence, she was still just an intern. But when he stepped into his office, Lena was already there, sitting in one of the chairs across from his desk, calm as ever. She slid the file toward him. "Here you go." Marcus frowned. "You finished it?" She simply nodded. Skeptical, he flipped open the file. At first, he expected to see a rushed, half-baked attempt. But as he scanned through the pages, his amusement turned into disbelief. Not only had Lena found the loopholes, she had dissected the entire contract, pointing out potential legal pitfalls, hidden risks, and even suggesting revisions that would make it airtight. Marcus closed the file and set it down. "Who helped you?" Lena tilted her head. "Excuse me? You couldn't have done this alone," he said, narrowing his eyes. "It's too good." Lena crossed her arms. "If it's too good, maybe you should start questioning your own lawyers." A slow smirk spread across Marcus's face. "You really don't scare easy, do you?" "I grew up arguing my way through life, Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Your office isn't much different from the real world." For the first time in years, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: intellectual excitement. Lena wasn't just smart. She was fearless. She challenged him in ways no one else dared. And he hated how much he liked it. Over the next few weeks, Lena became impossible to ignore. She wasn't just another intern anymore. She was outshining associates who had spent years in the firm. One afternoon, Marcus walked past the conference room and overheard a conversation that stopped him in his tracks. "She's too arrogant," one of the senior lawyers grumbled. "Just because she's smart doesn't mean she belongs here. She's making us all look bad," another added. "Marcus should put her in her place before she gets ahead of herself." Marcus clenched his jaw. He had seen this before, men in power feeling threatened by someone they couldn't control. Later that evening, he found Lena at her desk, buried in paperwork. "Walk with me," he said. Lena hesitated but followed him out of the office and onto the balcony. The city lights stretched before them, twinkling against the night sky. "People are talking," Marcus said, leaning against the railing. Lena exhaled. "Let me guess. The senior associates don't like me." Marcus chuckled. "You're making their lives difficult." "They're making mine impossible," she admitted. "I get the worst cases, the hardest deadlines, and every time I prove myself, they move the goalpost." Marcus studied her, impressed by her resilience. "And yet, you're still standing." Lena turned to him, her eyes sharp. "I don't need them to like me. I just need to win." Marcus felt something stir inside him. Something he couldn't quite name. Admiration? Fascination? Or was it something more? Whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it anymore. Lena Carter wasn't just an intern. She was a force of nature. And for the first time, Marcus found himself wanting to protect someone other than himself. Marcus had always believed emotions had no place in business. He had built his empire by being ruthless, by keeping his distance, by never allowing anyone too close. But with Lena, something was different. She had entered his world as an outsider, a delivery girl, and now she was standing at the center of it, challenging everything he thought he knew. One evening, Marcus found himself waiting for her outside the office. It wasn't intentional, or at least that's what he told himself. He had finished his work, but instead of leaving, he lingered. And when Lena finally emerged, stretching after another long day, he spoke before he could stop himself. "Hungry?" Lena raised an eyebrow. "Are you asking me to dinner?" Marcus smirked. "I'm asking if you're hungry. You can call it whatever you want." Lena hesitated, as if debating whether this was a good idea. But then, with a small shrug, she said, "All right, but I picked the place." Minutes later, Marcus found himself sitting in a small, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city. A place he would never have stepped foot in on his own. The smell of freshly grilled burgers and fries filled the air, and the worn-out booths spoke of decades of memories. "This is where you eat?" he asked, glancing around. Lena grinned. "This is where real food is." As they ate, Marcus saw a side of Lena he had never seen before. She talked about her childhood, about how she had to fight for every opportunity, how she had worked multiple jobs to put herself through school. "My mom worked 3 shifts to keep us afloat," she said, dipping a fry into ketchup. She used to say, "Lena, in this world, no one gives you a seat at the table. You either fight for it or build your own table." Marcus listened, captivated. "No one gave you a seat, so you built your own," he said, understanding dawning in his voice. Lena nodded. "And now that I'm here, I'm not letting anyone take it away." Marcus leaned back, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. She wasn't just smart. She was relentless. A fire burned in her that no amount of power, privilege, or intimidation could extinguish. "You know," he said, watching her carefully, "you're starting to make me regret underestimating you." Lena smirked. "Good. Maybe next time you won't judge people by their delivery uniform." Something shifted that night. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A spark, an understanding. But Marcus didn't have time to dwell on it, because the next morning, chaos erupted at the firm. Someone had leaked confidential information about one of their biggest clients. And the blame fell squarely on Lena. The accusations were ruthless. The senior associates who had always resented her now had an excuse to take her down. She was called into a board meeting, where Marcus sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Lena Carter, one of the senior partners, sneered. "Do you deny leaking these documents?" Lena's jaw clenched. "I didn't leak anything. The evidence says otherwise," another voice added, sliding a file across the table. "Your login credentials were used. Your workstation accessed these files." Lena's heart pounded. "That's impossible. It doesn't look impossible," someone interrupted. "And frankly, given your background, we should have known better than to trust you." Marcus felt a rare flash of anger at that comment. Lena's background, her struggles, they were using it against her. Everyone in the room was watching Marcus now, waiting for him to deliver the final blow. He should have dismissed her. It would have been easy. The board expected it. The firm demanded it. But instead, he met Lena's eyes. And for the first time in his life, he chose something other than power. "Lena isn't going anywhere," he said coldly. "Not until I find out who really did this." Gasps rippled through the room. Lena stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Marcus Whitmore had just declared war on his own firm. and he had done it for her. Silence hung in the boardroom like a heavy storm cloud. No one had expected Marcus to side with Lena, not against his own firm, not against his own people. But he had. And now, every eye in the room burned with a mixture of shock, resentment, and curiosity. "This is a mistake, Marcus," one of the senior partners warned. "If she's guilty and you protect her, it will cost you." Marcus didn't flinch. "Then let it cost me." Lena felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, gratitude, but also something she couldn't quite name. Something dangerous, something that made her heart pound in ways it shouldn't. She wasn't going to sit back and let Marcus fight her battle, though. "I want access to the logs," she said, turning toward the IT team. "If someone used my credentials, we'll track their activity. I know I didn't do this, and I'll prove it." Marcus nodded. "Give her everything she needs." The board members looked at each other, murmuring in disapproval, but no one dared challenge him directly. As Lena worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of evidence, Marcus watched her with growing admiration. The fire in her eyes, the sheer determination. She wasn't just proving her innocence. She was fighting for her place, for her future, and he couldn't look away. After 2 grueling days, she found it. A security loophole, a backdoor entry used by someone inside the firm. Lena stormed into Marcus's office, breathless. "It was Owen Calloway," she said, her voice sharp with urgency. "One of your senior partners. He used my credentials to leak those files. He set me up." Marcus's expression darkened. Owen had been with the firm for years, a trusted associate. But trust meant nothing when ambition turned to greed. Within hours, Owen was confronted. Under pressure, he cracked, confessing to everything. The board had no choice but to reinstate Lena, clearing her of all accusations. The victory was hers, but the moment it was official, she packed up her desk. Marcus found her in the hallway, a box in her arms. "You're leaving," he said, more a statement than a question. Lena met his gaze, something unreadable in her expression. "I proved my innocence. That's all I wanted." Marcus stepped closer. "And what if I want you to stay?" Lena exhaled a soft laugh. "You don't need me, Marcus. That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "I need someone who challenges me. Someone who doesn't just tell me what I want to hear. Someone who makes me—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Better." Lena's fingers tightened around the box. "Marcus, I underestimated you once. I won't do it again." His voice was lower now, a confession rather than a plea. "Stay. Not because I'm asking, but because you want to." Lena looked up at him, a war raging in her eyes. And then, for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. She set the box down, and Marcus Whitmore, ruthless, calculating, untouchable, allowed himself to smile, not because he had won, but because, for the first time in his life, he had something worth holding on to.